So we got the recording started. Double check, make sure I'm recording from the right channel. That's something that I kind of worry about all the time. All right, so now that it's recording, I can start to answer questions about the homework assignment. So could you repeat your question, please?
I want to know, in Atom Better, what methods are available to get the X and Y coordinates of where the user touches the screen?
Okay, where the user is touching the screen. Okay, there are multiple methods. It depends on what you're trying to track. Okay, so in this particular case, I can switch. Okay, let me start the blocks editor, and then we'll take a look at how this is all done. Okay, because what you're asking is already done in this particular app. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that app and try to answer your question in the process. So when we are waiting for, well, it's really fast. On my home computer, this will take like a good minute, to get started. But here it's like, bam, it's up. Emulator, bam, it's up. It's wow, much faster than what I have at home. All right, so we have the blocks editor up at this point, and we also have the resources editor, also up. So what I want to do is to answer your question, which is basically saying, okay, this is the sprite that we are interested in, okay? So how do we know its current location? Is that what you're asking? Okay. So if you go to the blocks editor screen, and then you go to My Blocks, you go to the in the sprite corresponding to the sprite that you're interested in. In this case, it's the car sprite. You can see all of these event handlers. Okay, so the first thing is which event handler do you want to use? Now, in your case, you're trying to you track where the user is touching on the sprite itself, right? Okay, so you cannot get that information directly, but you can get something close to it. Okay, so let me show you why I said that. Okay. There are only a few events that gives you, some kind of coordinate information. One is called dragged. The other one is flung. And then there are two more, which is touch down and touch up.
So one is dragged, and what's the name of the other one?
Flung.
Flung?
Flung, And then there are three more. One is, sorry? Yeah, flung is basically swipe, but it doesn't limit you to horizontal or vertical. You can basically swipe at any angle, but it has to be a linear motion. It has to be a quick one.
So if I were to add like a sound or something inside,
say again.
If I were to add like a sound or something inside,
You get to add a what?
sound like that little curve we did, and if I put that picture there, and make it so like when I flung, it will make the noise. So can I do that?
You can give it a try. You can always give it a try, but keep in mind that the flung event is only interpreted inside the canvas, so it doesn't apply to a screen. It only applies to a canvas. On the other hand, you can make your canvas basically fill up an entire screen, so that way the entire screen is actually a part of the canvas. Then you can actually do whatever you want with that canvas. But you lose some of the abilities because you don't have labels or buttons or check boxes inside a canvas. So you would have to emulate all of those user interaction objects using your own sprites. So you lose some, you gain some. I'm not sure whether it's worth it or not. It depends on your app. Okay. Question?
What's the main difference between a screen and a canvas?
A screen is the top level container, but a canvas is basically one of the components that you can put inside the screen. Okay, you can only draw 2D objects inside the canvas, but not on the screen itself. At least in App Inventor, that is a limitation. So if you want to be able to draw something, using lines, circles, and stuff like that, you can only do so inside a canvas, but not in the screen. On the other hand, you can make a canvas big, so you can make it kind of fill up the entire screen. then the entire screen will be a canvas. Then you can use sprite on the entire screen. Okay. All right. So there are 3 additional events. One is called touchdown, which is the event that gets triggered when you first press on any part of a canvas or a sprite. It produces the XY of the touch, which is relative to the upper left of the canvas. Okay, it says right there. So that means it's not reporting where you're touching on the sprite itself. It's telling you where you're touching relative to the canvas, the entire canvas. Okay. Now, on the other hand, because you already know the location of the sprite itself, because you can always get to the X and the Y of the sprite itself, you also know the height of the sprite itself, so you can, if you want to, calculate the relative location on the sprite itself. I'll draw a picture to make it kind of more clear. This is a touch up event. This happens when someone is removing their hand from the touch screen, basically the end of a touch sequence. And then this one is triggered when the user touches the sprite and then immediately lifts the finger. So it's really just a usual touch event like that, okay? So it doesn't correspond to a drag. So now my question to you is, are you tracking a initial touch, the release of a touch, or are you trying to keep track while the finger is still touching on the screen and dragging? You're keeping track of a drag. Okay, so if you're keeping track of a drag, then you have no choice but to utilize this particular event handler, which is image sprite car dot dragged. Okay, so you're basically keeping track of the location of the touch as an object or as a drag event is happening. Okay, and you can see that it reports 6 numbers, basically 3 pairs of numbers. The first pair is start X and start Y, and that corresponds to where the location of the entire start of the drag operation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The next one is previous. Okay. The previous is, as the name implies, okay, where was the touch location prior to this event, which is the previous event. Okay, so these events are generated every so often. I have no idea how often. We can actually use a timer to time it. But at this point, I'm not sure, how often they are generated. So basically, previous means, in the previous drag event, the hand touch location is previous X and previous Y. The last one is current X and current Y, and that corresponds to the current location of the touch. But it's also relative to the upper left corner of the canvas. But you can use the location of the sprite itself to help you understand, okay, but which part of the sprite is the touching. You can always do that calculation. Okay. So I'm going to draw a picture here, to kind of clarify what I said a little bit earlier. Let me go find the pen first. Okay. So when you look at a canvas is basically a container. It's a 2-dimensional container. Okay, so let's say this is the canvas. Location 0, 0 is at the upper left corner. Okay, that's basically how pixels are counted. It's counted from the top being 0 and the left is also 0. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So let's say you have a sprite. Let's say it's over here. Okay, this is your sprite, and the sprite, it has its coordinates 0. This is the point of origin of a sprite itself. In other words, when you position a sprite, when you specify the X and the Y of a sprite, you're actually specifying where the upper left corner of a sprite is located on the screen itself. Are we doing okay? Yep.
Why would we not want to know the center location of the sprite?
That I do not know, but this is the coordinate system chosen by app inventor. So let's say this location is x1, y1. Okay, this is the location of the sprite itself. Okay, And let's say somebody touches a part of the sprite here. So let's say this is the location of the sprite of the touch, and we'll call this x2, y2. Okay. Now x2, y2 is actually corresponding. This is actually the x2, and this is actually y2. In other words, it is reporting the touch location, not relative to the upper left corner of the sprite, but relative to the upper right corner of the entire canvas. Is that okay so far? Okay.
And the initial x and y is relative to the sprite itself?
The initial
x1,
no.
y1?
No, the initial, you mean
No,
starting the start
x
point?
and y1 on the sprite itself. x1,
Yes.
y1.
Yeah, x1 and y1, this is x1, and this is y1.
Okay, so it's relative to the canvas also.
Right. So everything is relative to the origin of the entire canvas. So if you want to calculate, exactly what is this distance, and also what is this distance, you can do a subtraction. So what you do is, this part here is x2 minus x1, and then this part here is y2 minus y1. Are we doing okay so far in terms of the calculations? Okay. Now that we know, the calculations, the next thing is how do we get x1, y1? Well, x1, y1, is fairly easy because it's current x and current y of a drag event. So this is basically our current x and y. Oh, I take it back. I'm sorry, I confused myself. Okay, this is not the current xy. This is current xy, the actual location of the touch. What about x1, y1? It's basically sprite dot x and sprite dot y. Sprite being the name of the sprite itself. So in my current program, if I scroll down on this particular sprite, I will be able to see the x and the y, which is image sprite car.x, image sprite car.y, and those two will be corresponding to x1 and y1 in the example. So what you do is, in this case, you have to subtract current. You have to subtract sprite dot x from current x to get the relative position of the touch relative to the origin of the sprite itself, and then you subtract sprite dot y from current y to get the relative vertical position of the touch relative to the origin of the entire sprite. Okay, so did I answer your question? Very good. Any other questions related to the homework assignment?
You have a question?
Yep.
How can you tell it's moving at 5 pixels?
How can you tell, or how can you tell
maximum
it?
Speed, right?
Right.
How can you tell you're going at maximum speed? How do you know that?
How do you know that?
Visually.
Oh, okay. The little ball is moving at exactly 5 pixels per second.
That's the
Well, 5
maximum
pixels per
speed
100 milliseconds, so it's actually 50 pixels per second.
per second.
Right.
Yeah, but how can you tell that's moving 5 pixels? The pixels are awfully small.
Right.
How can you tell you're moving at that speed just by looking at it?
Just by looking at it?
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, it's 5 pixels per 100 milliseconds, right? So in 1 second, how far is it going to go?
Say that again.
Okay, in 100
milliseconds.
in 1/10 of a second,
that's
it's
a tenth of
moving.
a second.
Okay, let me finish. In 1/10 of a second, it's moving 5 pixels.
Yes.
In 1 second, how many pixels should it move?
50.
50. And the canvas itself is supposed to be 300 pixels wide.
Okay.
So how long would it take?
6 seconds to get across.
Exactly. Time it.
Sit there.
Use a stopwatch. Yep. Or just watch the second hand tick. Yep.
I already asked you this, but I just want to clarify again. You said you just want the car bouncing on the x-axis. You don't
Yep.
want it randomly.
Nope, no random, just you make it go, you hit
Once
one
it hits the
edge and
wall,
then
go
bounce back.
back.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all that you need to do. Okay. Any other questions? No other questions about the homework assignment? Okay, so if there are no homework assignment related questions, we'll move on and we'll talk about a more kind of important concept. We have already touched on this concept. I have used it in the remote control car example, but we never really formally introduced the concept. So this is a good time to formally introduce the concept. And if you're taking another programming class by now, I think this concept should have been covered already in details. So this would be a good time to talk about that too. So that has to do with variables, and we have basically about 3 different types of things that we can consider quote unquote as variables. The first one is called a global variable. We'll talk about that. The second one is a tiny dB quote unquote variable. It's not actually called a variable, it's called a tag and a value. And the last one are the properties of components. They're not exactly variables, but we'll just consider, hey, it's kind of like a variable, but it's actually not a variable. So we'll look at all of these particular items today. And one, we want to know how do we use these, what are the differences between these, and when do we use which one. Okay, so these are the topics that we'll cover today. The first one to cover is our global variables and values, okay? Just values in general. So instead of reading my own notes here, what I'll do is I'm going to go back to my example in App Inventor. And, well, this is not a bad place to start because we do have global variables in this particular program already. A global variable needs a definition. So in this case, initial angle and also angle itself, both of these are global variables. In order to define a global variable, you need to go to the built-in part or the built-in tab, and then you go to the definition drawer, and then you drag the def block into your main program area. Then you can rename the name of the variable itself. You can name it anything you want, but I would name it to something that you can remember, and it also tells you what the variable will be useful for. Okay, so we'll just call this, name of car, okay? And it's not a good label because it has spaces in it. So we'll go ahead and rename it as your car name. Okay, that should be good. All right, and it needs an initial value, okay? We can stick an initial value to it. So we can go to text in this case because we want a text value and stash it here, and then we can change the text value to whatever we want to name it. Okay, what is the name of the car in Cars? The race car, the main character? McQueen, right? Sorry? Was it McQueen?
I didn't know what you were asking.
Oh, okay. It's a cartoon character, name of a cartoon character. Or animation character. So McQueen, let's say, is the name of my car. So this is how I can define 2 things. One is the name of a global variable. It's called car name. And then the value of the variable at this point is McQueen, which is coming from Cars. The original Cars. In Cars 2, Mater was the main character, the tow truck. Yeah, nobody watched Cars. Okay, very good.
Formula One. Formula One.
Formula One. Okay, so we'll define this, and then what we can also do now, now that we have a variable called McQueen, we can now do things with this. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this name here. Let's see. Let me go start a new emulator first, so that we can actually run this program. uploading the program to the emulator right now. So a global variable, doesn't do anything by itself. Okay, all it is doing is, a place to store a value, and in this case, McQueen is the initial value, which means it starts off with this value. As soon as the variable exists, it starts off with a value of McQueen. But as the name implies, a variable means the content or the value can change over time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and see, what we can do with a variable. So we have the app up and running right about now. There we go. And you can see McQueen is not anywhere, on this particular screen. Okay, we have the bouncing ball, and by the way, the bouncing ball is bouncing at about 5 pixels per 100 milliseconds. So that means when your car is moving, it should be about the same speed as the bouncing ball itself. Okay, except your car should be moving just back and forth horizontally and not bouncing all over the place. Okay, so what are we going to do with a variable? Well, it's storing a value, right? So what we can do is now we can use other elements to either change the variable itself or to refer to the value of the variable. Okay, let's go ahead and see what we can do to change this program to make use of a global variable. Okay, the first thing we can do is to change the user interface just a little bit so that we have a particular thing we can use to change the text of a global variable. Which element do you think I should use in order to specify new content for basically a text variable? A label is good for displaying a text box. Okay, a text box would be a good general tool to use to specify content for anything that's text-based. So in this case, I can use a text box. All right, so we'll go ahead and drag and drop a text box, so it's here. Cannot save one or more files. Please try it later. All right. Okay, so now we have a text box here, and the text box has a name of text box 1 by default. Okay, that doesn't seem to have anything to do with our car name here. Maybe we should rename it. Okay, we'll go ahead and rename our text box 1 to exactly car name. Okay, we click OK, and all right, so this is not good. I'm gonna do a refresh. Oh, I know why. Because I use a different account. I switched account on YouTube, and it switched my account in App Inventor too. All right. So let's sign out from that one, and then sign back in again. Okay, are we back to drive 2? Let's double check, make sure okay, now we're back to drive 2, but I lost all my changes from earlier, so I'm gonna have to, oh no, it's still here. Okay, great. So it didn't lose everything. It did lose my text box, so I'm gonna have to drag and drop the text box again. Okay, and also to rename the text box so that it becomes now, car name. Okay, all right, great. So with this control, it would seem that I have some kind of correspondence between the text box and the global variable car name. Well, let's see whether that works or not. Okay, and the easiest way to check whether that's going to work or not is to go to our emulator, and it doesn't have a text box, so I think something is not working. I'm going to close my blocks editor and then start it over again, because I think it basically could not communicate with the resources editor because of the change of username. And we want to double check to see whether the global variable is still here. If not, we'll define it. Okay, it's still here. Perfect. We just have to link to our emulator again, and then this time there should be a text box in our emulator. So the bottom line, is, I'm just trying to show you that even if you name a global variable and a text box exactly the same, there's no relationship between the two. Okay, so there's no automatic association from a text box to a global variable. All right, so this time we do have a text box, and we can just type, well, the first thing we notice, let me just go back here. The first thing we notice is text box 1 doesn't have any content. It doesn't say McQueen. Remember, the global variable has the content of McQueen, and it's not shown here in text box 1. What's the deal? The other thing we also want to see is, well, maybe the global variable was not initialized correctly. Maybe, the initial value of the global variable was not McQueen, even though the code says, it should be McQueen. Maybe it was not. Okay. So how do we check that? How do we check the value of a global variable? There are several ways to do it. What is the quickest and the dirtiest and quickest way to do it?
Put it into the text box.
You can put it in a text box. You can also put it into a label, or you can use a notifier and pop up a dialog box, to basically give you the value of a global variable. So there are several ways to do it. So what I will do is I'm going to link it directly, by using code. So what I will do is to go back to the blocks editor here, and then this time I have to do it, when the program or when the screen first gets initialized. Okay, so that means I have to go to my blocks, go to screen 1, and basically use this particular event to do everything that I need to do when the application first starts. So I will have to go here, and then we'll go to, how do I change the name of, or the content of a text box? Here's car name, and under my definition, there's also car name. Which one should I use? Well, these two things are completely independent. They're different. Let me drag the blocks out, and then I'll explain that, okay? We'll have set global car name here. We also have car name as a text box, and inside that we have set car name dot text to something. So let's take a closer look at these two blocks here and see whether whether we are getting more confused, or whether we can clarify which one is what. Okay. The first one, which is set global car name to, is changing the global variable itself. The second one, set car name dot text to, is setting the content of a text box, which coincidentally also has a name of car name. But these two entities, the text box versus the global variable, these two entities are completely independent. They just so happen to have the same name, but they are not linked in any way, unless you do it by code, which is what I'm going to do next. Are we okay so far with that concept? Somewhat, kind of.
Yes.
Okay, we are good on that. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and actually make that association, which means when the program first starts, I already have car name initialized to McQueen because of the way it is defined. Okay, so this is already defined to be McQueen to begin with. So we'll go ahead and set the text content of a text box to the content of the global variable. So we go to my definitions, then we go to car name as a global variable, and then we just attach it here, and that's done. Okay, so now if I go back to my application, and you can see, hey, nothing has changed. Well, that's because the program is already running. When your program is already running, App Inventor can update the application while it is running without restarting the entire application. And if the application is not restarted, the initialized event does not happen. So in this case, I have no choice but to get out of the entire application using the back button. And then I go to App Inventor, and then basically just click on emulator 5554 again, and confirm that I want to restart the application on the device. And then this time we should see McQueen inside the text box, because I just copied the content from the global variable called car name with the content of McQueen into the content of the text box, which is also called car name. Okay, it's getting there. There we go. Well, this is great. Okay, so finally, we can link the value of a variable to the property of a component. The text property is the one that we are changing in this case. Is that okay so far? Now, how do we change a global variable? If I want the text box here to be linked to the global variable, what if I want to change McQueen to, say, Mater? Okay, so I can change this to Mater, press the Enter key, or click Done. Okay, well, the text box is now changed to Mater, but what happens to the global variable? Do we know whether the global variable is changed or not? Not from just looking at this screen, okay? Because remember, global variables, or the content or the value of a global variable, cannot be seen on the screen. So we have to use some way to reflect, okay, what is the current value of the global variable that we called car name. Okay, what do you think is an easy way to do this? Do you still remember a notifier? A notifier gives you the ability to display a dialog box. So let's go ahead and try that one out, and I'll also use this opportunity to answer one of the questions that one of you asked, okay, which is basically, how do I format the output of a string so it can contain some components coming from a property of a component or global variable, and other parts is just whatever we wanted to say. Okay. So now we will change the program just a little bit. Okay, we go back to the resources editor, and then we want to add a notifier to the whole thing. So notifiers are under other stuff, and we'll just drag and drop a notifier into my application. And then we go back to blocks editor. What am I going to do? Because when I make changes to the text box, I need to somehow know that the text box is getting changed, so that way I can report back and say, oh, this is the new content of the global variable car name, and see whether the car name itself is getting updated as well. Okay. So how are we going to do something like that?
Got text box, got focus.
Got focus. Now, if you have got focus, then it will generate the event when you click on the text box itself. So let's go ahead and see what kind of events are related to a text box. Okay. So we go to My Blogs, we go to car name, which is the text box that we are interested in. Events are always listed first. Okay. So we have two events associated. We have got focus, and then we have lost focus, and both of these are related to a text box. So which one do we want to use when I say when the name or when the content of a text box is changed, I want that to trigger?
Lost focus.
Lost focus. Yep. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get lost focus, and then what do we do? All we want to do is to go to notifier 1, and then we just want to say, we just want to display a very simple message, to the screen. And we can say, we can show alert. That's one of the easiest way to do it. Display a temporary notification, but this one fades away after a while. Okay, so it's not going to be permanent. We can also use, show message in dialog, and that basically won't go away until we say, oh, okay, I get it, it's time to make this go away. Okay, we'll go ahead and show the title first. Okay, we'll deal with the title. The title is really just whatever text, whatever content you want to specify as the title on the title bar of the dialog box. So in this case, we can say car name is, okay, that's the name, that's the title. Button text is what is displayed on the button itself when the dialog box appears. So we go to text again, and then we can just specify here. We'll just say, got it. The message is the most important part. Okay. So, and this is also going to answer a question that one of you asked. What if I want the output to be global variable car name is, and then followed by the actual content of the global variable? How are we going to do that? Because a part of that has literal text, I'm going to specify exactly what I want it to display. The other part depends on the value of a global variable. So let me just kind of show you, my first attempt, which is not going to work, okay? So the first attempt is specify text here, and I'm just going to specify global variable car name is car name. Okay. So I'm trying to say, the first car name is referring to just the name of the variable, and then the second car name is trying to refer to the value of the global variable car name. Okay. So we'll see whether this works or not. Okay. I already know it doesn't work, but we'll see what happens when we try something like that. So I'll click on the control. When you click on the text box, if I had captured, got focus, that would have executed right now, because when I click on it, it's getting the focus of the input. So right now I can change my text here back to Mater, and then I press the done key. Well, nothing is happening. There's no event happening here. Well, guess who still has the focus? The text box still has the focus. How do I know that? The cursor is still blinking, and you can still see the highlight around it. So that means this particular component still has the focus, and that's why the event has not happened. Okay, I need to click somewhere else to get rid of the focus in order for the event to happen. Okay, and I can click just about anywhere else. Oh, I guess not. It won't lose the focus. I think the tab key will make it lose the focus. Yep. Uh-oh, I can't lose the focus. How about clicking one of those keys? Nope. Nothing will make it lose focus. Everything else is working. It's because it's the only user interaction element on screen, and I cannot lose the focus. Oh, that is not good.
You can make another text box.
Or a button.
Or a button.
Yeah, a button would do it too. Alright, so we'll just make a button. And I don't even need any name for the button itself, because I can use tab to go between the two. Alright, so there we go. Let's give it a try. Later. Press done. And then press the tab key. It's not losing the focus. That is interesting. Focus is always there. Okay, let's see if I get rid of the content, because I want to debug it now. I want to see whether this has anything to do with it. So I'm going to go back to here. Okay, press done. The tab key is just specify a part of the text. So I might need another text box to lose the focus of one text box. That's kind of now we have two text boxes. back to the emulator. Re-upload. Okay, so we will change, once again, we'll change McQueen to Mater. Press done. And then this time I'll click the next text box. Okay, so this time it changes the focus just fine. All right. And I'll click the button. Clicking the button doesn't change the focus, which is really odd. All right. Now that I know that fixed the problem, we'll put this block of code back into the car name lost focus. Back to the app here, and we'll change Mater to Sally, okay, which is another character in cars. Click done. Click on the next text box, and now our notifier code works. So, it's not telling me the right thing. It says global variable car name is car name, but it really should be either McQueen or Sally. Okay, McQueen is the original name. That's how I initialized the global variable. Sally is the content of the text box, which I'm suspecting may or may not update the global variable directly. Okay, but this is not working because it says it's just car name. Okay, so that means I have to do something about this, and this will answer one of the questions that you guys, well, one of you asked me, which is basically how do I format a text string so a part of it comes from literal text, things that I want to display verbatim as specified, and a part of it will refer to the content of a variable.
Make text. Make text.
You can use make text, and that's the actually easiest way to do it. Okay, so you go to text here, and then you go to make text, and if you just hover or put your hand over make text, it says appends all the arguments to form a single text string. If there are no arguments, make an empty text. So that means you can specify as many components as you want, and it will merge all the components together. It's basically like the join operation, except it's very handy because you don't have to add one more join operator every time you have something else to specify. So we'll go ahead and use make text here. So I will take this one outside of message, go back to text, and say make text as the message. Drag this one back here because I want to keep a good portion of this, except for the portion where I'm expecting the name of the car itself or the content of the global variable car name. We go to my blocks, go to my definitions. Remember, when you want to access a global variable, it is under my definitions of my blocks. It is not under any other of the sections. So in this case, we have global variable car name, and then we just drag and drop it here into this socket. So this time, the first part of the string to be displayed is just literally global variable car name is, and then the space. The second component, on the other hand, is going to refer to the value of the global variable car name. So this time I can actually see the content of a global variable. So we'll go ahead and go back to the app here. Okay, same thing. We'll change from Sally to another character, Doc. Okay, and then we'll click the other text box to switch focus so that the first text box would lose focus at this point. And the dialog box says global variable car name has a content is McQueen. Okay, so that's just confirmed that the text box is not linked to the global variable at all. Okay, it doesn't get anything from the global variable unless we specify the content of the text box, and when it's updated, it doesn't update the global variable either. So that means if you want a text box to be linked to a global variable, you will have to do it yourself. Okay, So what I'll do is I'm going to take this block out because it's really just for debugging purposes. So what I really need to do is to do the reverse of what we did here. Okay, what we did here is to set the text property of a text box car name to the content of the global variable, also called car name. Now we want to do exactly the opposite because I just updated the text box. I want the global variable to have the same content. So this time it is the other way around, which is to set the global variable car name to the text property of the text box car name. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. It's really the opposite of this. So this time we want to go to my definitions, and this time we want to set global car name to, okay, because we are changing the global variable to the text property of the text box car name. This is the text box car name, and inside here you can refer to the text property, which is this guy here, and we just plug it in here, and this time, you know, it would work. And just to be sure, I'm reattaching the debugging code here so that we can display the global variable car name right after we set it to the property text of car name, the text box itself. Go back to my application here, and this time we'll change it to back to Mater, okay, because it was McLean before. I change it to Mater now. Click the other text box, and you can see global variable car name is now updated to Mater because I actually specified my own code to do that. Are there any questions at this point? No questions? What would be some of the uses of a global variable? I mean, obviously in this case, you know, I don't really need the global variable car name because if text box is always going to be there, I can always refer to the text property of the text box car name, and I don't have to worry about, you know, a global variable. What about in some cases where you have certain values that you don't want to display at all on screen, but it is actually important in your application? That's when global variables can come in handy. Can anyone name a particular place where a global variable is useful?
For settings?
For settings? Okay, well, for settings you want to use TinyDB because you want it to be
But
persistent.
If you don't want to use, if you don't want.
Oh, if you don't want to save it? Okay. What about in this particular app here? Okay, I'm going to change the app back to, I can use the scroll button to change focus. I guess that's how, you know, I can change focus, is to use the scroll button. Yep.
What about using global variables for constants?
You can use it for constants, exactly. You know, so this way, if you want to change the constant, you don't have to change all the references to the numbers. Instead, you change one definition and you're all done. Yep, that's a perfectly good use of global variables as well. Okay, but in this particular app, okay, before I made all these modifications, it already had a few global variables. So we'll take a look at, you know, those particular global variables and, you know, try to figure out, hey, why do we have those global variables, and what did we do with those global variables? So at this time, I'm removing the extra components that are no longer needed, and then we switch back to the blocks editor, and I'll show you, you know, how I use. Okay, this is definitely not useful anymore. We'll toss it also. All right, we have this initial angle as a global variable. What is the purpose of initial angle in this particular app? Okay, we talked about it on Monday, so I want to check to see if you guys still remember, you know, how this app works. It has to do with the steering wheel, okay?
You visually touch the steering wheel.
Exactly. Okay, so if I run the app itself, let me get rid of the keyboard here. See, when I drag the steering wheel, I can grab it by any point, okay? I can grab it by, let's say, you know, this part here, And when I rotate the steering wheel, it is still using that part, or more or less, that part as the point of contact. It's just like, when you hold on to a steering wheel, your hand is still holding on to the same place. So how do I know, which part of the steering wheel I was gripping onto when I first started the drag event? Initial angle. Okay, that's the purpose of that particular global variable. Let's take a look at the code. How did I make use of the initial angle? This is the place where it gets its value. Okay, this is how I set the value of initial angle, and it's inside the event called touchdown. In other words, as soon as my finger touches the screen, this event happens. This is before any drag events happens. This is the first initial event, which is just to touch down. As soon as it happens, I make a snapshot of the angle corresponding to the touch point relative to the center of the steering wheel. So this way I remember, where I touch, or the angle of touch relative to the center of the steering wheel. So later on, when I scroll, my finger around the steering wheel, I would use the drag event of canvas steering, and I would have to remember to subtract the initial angle from the angle that I just calculated using that calculation, so that way it's always relative to the original grip point and not relative to 0 degree of the sprite itself. Are we still doing okay so far? Okay, let me ask you another question. Okay, if I did not use initial angle, instead I just say we'll do the calculation based on the touch point and the angle relative to the center of the wheel, what do you think will happen? In other words, what if I get rid of this guy here, and instead I just specify 0. Oops. Stash here and turn it to 0, which is the same effect as not having the subtraction at all. So what do you think will be the effect now? Now that I made this one little change. Okay, let's try to figure out what it's going to do, and then we'll actually test it and see whether it's actually doing it. We'll take a look at the entire code. Oops. The wrong part of the screen. Move right there. Okay. So this is the modified version, which is not going to work the way we want it, but we still want to figure out what it is going to do. So we'll take a look at this code here and try to figure out, exactly what is it doing. It is a part of the canvas steering drag event, which means this will generate when I'm dragging somewhere within the steering wheel canvas. Okay, no big deal. We got that part already. And then I'll go ahead and erase this picture and replace it with the steering wheel canvas screen. Okay, so here is this square is representing the steering canvas. Okay, the canvas for the entire steering wheel. And once again, we have the coordinates starting at 0, 0 at the upper left corner. But this time I have a steering wheel that is located right at the center of the whole thing. Is that okay so far? Okay. This thing has a fixed size. Okay, it's 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. Okay, so this is the width and this is the height. Are we still doing okay? I sized the sprite itself to be 50 by 50. So the sprite itself is 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels high. So in order to make the sprite appear to be at the center of the entire canvas, where do you think this origin is supposed to be? 25 and 25, okay? So this is 25, 25 as the upper left corner of the sprite itself. Is it all making sense at this point? Okay. So let's focus on the drag event here. Okay, so let's say I put my finger, somewhere, let's say here. Okay, So I'm touching at this point here, and I touch it long enough so that it will start the drag event. If you just touch and release, it's not going to start the drag event. You actually have to touch down for a good, I think, half a second in order for the drag event to happen. So I push my finger here, I stay here for at least half a second, so I can actually start to have your drag events happening. Okay, and let's just say this is coordinate. This will be reported as current X and current Y in the event itself. Okay. So what do I do to measure this angle? We talked about this on Monday too. There's a math function to do it. That would be, it's actually arctangent 2. Exactly, it's already on screen. All right, so we'll go ahead and do a arctangent 2, but I cannot just do arctangent 2, right? If I just do arctangent 2, oops, I said one thing, but I need something else. If I just use arctangent 2 and then just give it the y and the x, okay, and interestingly, you have to supply the y first and then the x, okay, because in tangent, it is y divided by x, which is a ratio. So in this case, if I just give it yx here, it's not going to give me this theta, because x is actually, x is actually this distance here. This is actually my x, because it is reporting the coordinate, but it's relative to the origin of the entire canvas, not the center of the steering wheel. And obviously the y is also not going to be the y that I want, because the y is actually relative to, once again, the upper left corner of the entire canvas, not even the sprite, the entire canvas. So if I do this arctangent to yx here, what am I actually getting? Which angle am I getting? I'm going to use a different color because otherwise this would be confusing. If I just do arctangent 2, I will be measuring this angle. Do I care about the angle at all? Oh, no. It has nothing to do with this application, right? Okay, so that means I have to do something about these numbers before I plug it into arctangent 2. What I really want is I want this as my y. I want this as my x. How do I get to this y and this x here? Now I know the steering wheel is right, the center of the steering wheel is also at the center of the entire canvas. Can I calculate the center of the entire canvas easily? Divided by 2, right? Because this is the width of the entire canvas, this is the height of the entire canvas. If I want the center of the entire canvas, it would just be the width divided by 2 and the height divided by 2. That will give me the dead center of the entire canvas. Is that making any sense? Okay, so that will give me a good starting point. And that's why here you see canvas steering wheel steering dot height divided by 2, and then this one is the width divided by 2. Are we doing okay so far? Because that will give me this particular point. Now this point is important, but that's not the final goal that I want, because what I really want is this y here. But once I know what this is, getting this y is easier. Okay, or getting this particular height here is easier. Okay, so how do I get to this y? This y has something to do with current y, which is one of the arguments from the event handler itself. I know it has something to do with the center of the entire canvas, which is canvas with, this is height divided by 2. Okay, so I know these two things will give me what I want. What I'm not sure is which one should I subtract from which other one. Okay, canvas height divided by 2 gives me this number. Current y gives me this value. What I want is the other part. So how should I do the subtraction?
Canvas height divided by 2 minus current height.
Exactly. So I need to take this one over here and put it over here. And guess what? I have exactly that in the code. So that explains the first part or the Y component. If I scroll over just enough to show that. Okay, we're just focusing on the arctangent 2, so I can display the entire arctangent 2 here. So that's why we have canvas steering dot height divided by 2, which will give me the center height wise of the entire canvas. Subtract current y2 from it, so that I can actually see this particular y on the steering. And I'll do about the same thing with x, except in x is a little bit different, because current x gives me this measurement. This is current x, which is the location of x of the drag event. This is height. This is width divided by 2. So if I want just this part here, it's the difference. In other words, I'm just looking at current x minus width divided by 2. That will give me the horizontal displacement that I need for this calculation. And that's exactly what we see here. Current x2 is an argument that comes with the event handler itself. Canvas steering dot width is a property of the canvas. I have divided by 2 first, and then this difference will give me the x value that I need for arctangent 2. Okay, one will give me, this will give me the y value. This will give me the x value. I plug those values into arctangent 2, and it will give me the theta that I displayed here, which is the angle of the touch point here relative to what? Relative to the center and also the horizontal line of the steering wheel. Okay? So if I set the rotation of the steering wheel to exactly this theta, what do you think is going to happen on the screen? In other words, the code that I already have right here is going to do exactly that. Okay? It will set the heading of the steering wheel sprite according to theta. So what are we going to see on the screen as this particular block executes? Okay, the steering wheel normally, looks like this. The orientation is actually 0 degrees, which means it is pointing this way. If I change it by theta, the steering wheel will now look like this. And guess where my touch point is? My touch point is right there, which is right here. In other words, without the other component, initial angle, when I drag anywhere on the steering wheel to turn it, it will always be assuming that I'm dragging it or touching it or gripping it by this point here, the right-hand side of the steering wheel. Okay. Now this is what I think it should do. Now it is a good time to test and see whether it is going to do it or not. Okay. Now this is a debugging technique that I think people really should use. In other words, a lot of people, and I'm not just saying students in a community college taking 1 or 2 classes. I'm talking about students at UC Davis, okay, 3rd year students, juniors at UC Davis. When they're panicking in a crunch, when they have to turn in homework assignments, I have seen this many, many times. Okay, not everybody would do it, but there are enough people to cause concern. When their programs are not doing what they think it should be doing, the students will start to make random changes to the program and hope that one of the random changes will accomplish what the program is supposed to do. In other words, they have given up on, I think I should know what the program is supposed to do. I'll run the program to verify my understanding. They have reversed that. Okay, they basically are making random changes to the program and hope the program will fix itself and one of these random changes will fix it. Okay, so I just want to introduce the methodology of debugging by saying, okay, whenever we make changes to a program, we need to try to figure out what the program is supposed to do first, and then we run the program just to verify whether that is the case or not. Are we doing okay so far on that concept? Has nothing to do with app programming. This has to do with programming in general, not just app programming. Okay, now that we have done the analysis, it is time to actually run the program and see whether it is doing what I think it would be doing. Okay. All right, so now we have the app here. It should be updated already with new code. So I will try to grab it at this point here. Generate the drag event. Come on, drag. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, it's not that sensitive.
Yeah, it's just just takes a while, but you can see that every time it starts dragging, it's dragging by the right side of the hand of the steering wheel. Okay, it's not doing what it is supposed to do anymore, and that's just me changing the program and not to use initial angle. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, so this is one use of a global variable. Basically, it is just some value, a number, text, or whatever, that you need one part of the program to store and then another part of the program to retrieve in order for the program to do what it is supposed to do. So in this case, we have a value that we call initial angle that was set initially by the touchdown event, but it is going to be utilized by the drag event here. So if I change the program and fix it, fixing it is really easy. Get rid of the 0, put the global variable initial angle back, then we can go back to the code or the simulator, make sure that the program is now fixed. So I will try to grab it by this part here. Okay. There we go. So now it is it's dragging by wherever I touched it initially. No. There we go. It's not very sensitive. There we go. Are we doing okay so far? Now, on the other hand, do you think this initial angle is something that I want to save when I exit from the application, so the next time I start the application, it will remember that particular angle?
Yeah.
Why would I want to save that? Now, let's say I saved it, okay? So let's say I save initial angle. So next time I start the application, what's going to happen? Now, how do we utilize the value called initial angle? Who changes it? Who sets it?
The user as soon as they touch it. The user as soon as they touch it.
As soon as they touch the steering wheel sprite, right? So assuming that you save the value in a persistent way so that the next time you bring up the application it still remembers that, it's not going to do any good, because as soon as you touch the steering wheel, it will get a new value anyway. Okay, the saved value is not going to be of any use to you. Is that okay? So that means in this particular case, it doesn't matter. You can save it and restore it all you want, but it's not going to do any good, because every time you touch the steering wheel sprite, it will get a new value. You can restore it from the previous application, but it's not going to be of any use. Okay, very good. What do you think might be something that we want to save? Score, okay? If this is a game, you might want to store the high score, okay? So you can basically say, okay, last time you were able to stay alive for this long without crashing and running into the bouncing ball. Okay, that would be something that you might want to store.
Location of the car on the screen.
Location of the car on the screen if you want to continue a game. In other words, you have a button that lets you pause the game so you can continue later. That would be useful. But in that case, you will have to store a lot more than just that, because you have to store basically the entire state of the game itself. Okay, very good. Anything else that you might want to store, with a game like this? Now, if you want to restore the game, initial angle is not what you want to store, but the current state of the steering wheel is what you want to store. Because as you restore the game, you want the pedal position and also the steering wheel angle to be restored as well, so the car will continue the turn as the same turn that you interrupted when you saved the game. Any other questions? Other questions? All right. So this is what we can do with global variables. Now we want to look at, but what kind of value can we store in a global variable? Well, when you look at the built-in tab inside the blocks editor, that gives you a really good idea of what kind of value we can store. You can store text value corresponding to names, addresses, anything that is alphanumeric plus punctuation, you can store as text. You can store numbers, okay, numerical values. Now, in a actual programming language like C++ or Java, we make the distinction between floating point numbers as opposed to integers. In App Inventor, it doesn't make any distinction. Every number is just a number. Okay? We can also store Boolean values or true-false values, so those will correspond to the logic tab here. And it has its colors, which are basically just numbers, but we are not too concerned about colors at this point, so we'll just focus on the first three. The first three, once again, are text values, math or number values, and also logic values, basically Boolean true-false values. So those are the basic stuff that we can store in a single variable. But then you might end up with a lot of different variables in your program. Okay? What about that thing called a list? What exactly is it? Is anyone taking P300 or P370 right now in this same semester? Okay. Have you guys started to talk about arrays yet? No? Okay. So we're not going to talk about arrays, but a list is basically just like a list, okay, like a shopping list, okay? What is the main difference between a list, a shopping list, and text? Okay, I will just use the whiteboard to explain this part here. So I want you guys to at least take away from this class this little concept here. And by the way, the concept of a list does not exist in Visual Basic. It's known as an array. Okay. Okay. Text is just text, right? My name, TAK space AUYEUNG, can be stored as text. Okay. This class, cisp362, can be stored as text. cisp362 can be stored as text. Any sentence you can write can be stored as text. Any address you can write can be stored as text.
Being a char array.
Yeah, it's kind of like a char array in C, but it's not exactly the same thing. But it's close. Okay, it is very close. Okay, so that's text. What exactly is a list? Well, a list is a list. A list means you can have different items within the variable. Okay, so I can have a single variable, let's say it's called var1, but if it is a list instead of text, number, or Boolean, then you can say, oh, the first item it has is the text of my name. The second item it has maybe the course number here, which is cisp362, and the third item may be a true-false value. Okay, maybe it's just indicating, is this course active? Am I teaching this class this semester? So that will make it true. A list can basically say, this is the first item I'm storing, this is the second item I'm storing, and this is the third item that I'm storing. In other words, a list is a container. Okay? It is a container that can contain multiple items. How do you get to a particular item? You locate it by its position. First item, second item, third item.
First one's one.
The first one is 1, yes. In this case, we start with 1 and not 0. Yep.
Can this list hold different data types?
Yes.
So the first item can be text, the second
Yep.
item can be a number.
You can definitely do that. Or in this case, I can have maybe the third item is 25, which indicates the number of students in this class. And talking about that, I have forgotten to take roll for this class for several sessions, so I'm just going to pass it right now. Okay, if you have to leave soon, you might want to sign on the roll sheet first. We are running a little bit over time, but I do want to finish as much as I can here. So yes, you can store different things here, and guess what? As one of the components, it can be its own list. In other words, the fifth item can be a list on its own. Okay, so this one can be its own list. Wow, that is kind of wild. I mean, you can have a container containing another container. But have we encountered concepts like that already, almost on a daily basis? What would that be?
In this class or in life?
In life, in general, with computers. A container that can contain other containers. Or it can contain things that are not containers. Directories, exactly. Okay, folders. Okay, because when you create a folder, you can create additional subfolders inside it, and then each one of the subfolder can contain other subfolders. But you can also contain individual files. So in this case, the first, second, third, and fourth items, they are basically equivalent to individual files inside a folder. But nothing says you cannot have another folder inside this folder. So the fifth item, in this case, is a folder on its own. And there's no limitation as to how many subfolders you can contain within a folder. Now, there's one major difference between this and the file system. And the difference is we locate these things by their location, positions. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth, instead of my name. Now, that is actually not true either, because you can actually have pairs of name versus value, name versus value, name versus value. So it's a topic on its own. We'll talk about this on Monday, but this is a very useful topic because. Yep, go ahead.
One question. Particular.
Okay, so maybe wait until the lab time. Okay, so I'm gonna end the lecture, pretty much at this point, but I do want to point out what we'll be doing next time. We'll be looking at lists. Because even though it seems like an advanced topic, it is also exceptionally useful because you can use one single variable to store a lot of different items. Okay, and on top of that, this is also your ticket to transport or move information from one part of your program to another part of the program, because it has these little nifty things. Okay, the nifty things that we are talking about here is the ability to convert a list into text that we call a row, a CSV row, comma separated value row, and it can also reverse that operation. And those are very useful operations because now, yep, go ahead.
Can that list of CSV deal with, can it traverse a giant stack directory like such?
I believe so. I have not tested whether it can nest, but I'm suspecting it can. But you can also, this is also the other part that is really useful, which is lookup in pairs. Most scripting languages like PHP and Perl have a feature like that. It's called a pair. It's a name and a value, name and a value. It is called a hash in Perl. I think in PHP, how did they call that? Is it just name association or something like that? Associative array, very good. So that's a different name for exactly the same thing. And App Inventor has that too. Now these are extremely useful because now you can use it to communicate with a server. Okay, you can basically use one single variable to store everything about your app. And using one single conversion, turn it into text, and then specify that as a parameter to update a remote database using the web component. And then you can also use the same way to retrieve it from a web server, restore a single variable that is complex in your application. So instead of having to deal with like 20 gazillion variables, individual variables, and you have to remember to save every single one and restore every single one, there's only one thing you have to save and one thing you have to restore. It makes the handling of all of these things so much easier. We're out of time today, and this is a fairly complex topic, but we'll talk about it on next Monday because I think it is going to be very useful for multiple purposes. All right, so the lecture part is done. If you have any homework, questions, we can answer those questions now. I'm going to start the recorder.